Have you ever had a moment where everything in your life looked normal on the outside, but deep down, something felt completely wrong? Maybe you kept feeling uneasy for no reason. Maybe certain doors kept closing no matter how hard you tried to force them open. Or maybe the same warning signs kept showing up over and over again in different ways. Here's the terrifying part. Most people don't realize God was warning them until after the damage is already done. And today, we're talking about 7 signs God is warning you about something before it's too late. But make sure you stay until the end, because the final sign is the one people ignore the most, and it often changes the direction of their entire life. Let's get into it. When your peace suddenly disappears, one of the clearest spiritual warning signs is the sudden loss of inner peace. And no, this isn't normal stress from work, bills, or everyday responsibilities. This feels different. It follows you everywhere. You can distract yourself for a few minutes, but the discomfort always comes back. Sometimes God removes peace to get your attention. You could be in the wrong relationship, the wrong business deal, the wrong environment, the wrong friendship. Everything may look fine logically, but spiritually something feels off. And this is where most people make a huge mistake. They ignore the warning because they don't want to let go of what feels familiar. But throughout the Bible, peace often acted like confirmation. When peace disappears repeatedly, it may be one of the strongest signs God is warning you. Now here's where things get interesting. People often pray for God to speak loudly while ignoring the discomfort already happening inside their spirit. Sometimes the warning already came. We just didn't want to listen. Repeated obstacles keep blocking you. Have you noticed how some things in life flow naturally, while other things feel impossible no matter how hard you push? Now this next part might surprise you. Not every closed door is an attack from the enemy. Sometimes it's protection from God. You apply for the opportunity and get rejected. You chase a relationship and it falls apart. You force a plan and somehow everything keeps collapsing. At some point, you have to stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is God trying to keep me away from?" Some of the biggest warning signs from God come through repeated resistance. Because when God is redirecting your life, He will often block paths that eventually lead to pain. And this is where most people make another mistake. They keep forcing doors that God already closed. But if every step forward creates confusion, exhaustion, and constant setbacks, maybe the warning isn't the obstacle itself. Maybe the warning is your refusal to stop pushing. You keep hearing the same message everywhere. Have you ever prayed about something, and then suddenly the same message keeps appearing everywhere? You hear it in a sermon, a random video, a Bible verse, a conversation. Even strangers somehow say exactly what you needed to hear. That's not always coincidence. Sometimes God repeats messages because we ignored them the first time. And this next part matters. God knows exactly how to get your attention personally. If the same warning keeps showing up repeatedly, don't brush it off. Especially when it directly connects to something you've been struggling with privately. This is one of the most overlooked signs from God you shouldn't ignore. Because repetition is often confirmation. The problem is most people hear the message, feel convicted for a moment, and then go right back to the same behavior. And this is where spiritual blindness begins. Conviction starts getting stronger. There's a huge difference between guilt and conviction. Guilt pushes you away from God. Conviction pulls you back toward Him. And when God is warning you about something, conviction becomes harder and harder to ignore. Maybe certain habits suddenly don't feel right anymore. Maybe every time you make a specific decision, your spirit feels heavy afterward. Maybe things that once entertained you now leave you feeling empty. But here's where things get interesting. Conviction is actually protection. It's God warning you before a small compromise turns into a massive consequence. Most people wait until disaster happens before they change. But hearing God's warning early can completely change your future. Because the longer people ignore conviction, the quieter their conscience becomes. And that's dangerous. Certain relationships start draining you. One of the clearest biblical signs from God is when relationships begin exposing toxic patterns you were blind to before. Suddenly you notice manipulation, constant chaos, disrespect, emotional exhaustion. You leave conversations feeling drained instead of encouraged. And this is where most people struggle. Because sometimes the people God warns us about are the people we don't want to let go of. But pay attention to this carefully. Some relationships are assignments. Others are distractions. Not everyone sent into your life was meant to stay forever. If someone constantly pulls you away from peace, integrity, or spiritual growth, God may already be warning you through the fruit of that relationship. Because the wrong people can delay your destiny longer than you realize. And this is where many lives get stuck. People ignore red flags because emotions are louder than wisdom. You feel spiritually drained all the time. Let's talk about something many people experience but rarely understand. Spiritual exhaustion. You're physically present but emotionally disconnected. You pray, but something feels blocked. You try to focus, but your mind feels heavy. Even things that once inspired you suddenly feel empty. Now, obviously, not every difficult season is spiritual, but sometimes this heaviness becomes a warning sign, especially when it's connected to environments, habits, or people that constantly pull you away from clarity and peace. And this next part matters. God often allows discomfort before destruction. Why? Because warnings are acts of mercy. The goal isn't punishment. The goal is redirection. Sometimes God allows you to feel uncomfortable in a place because He knows what will happen if you stay there too long. Small problems start becoming bigger consequences. This is the sign many people ignore until it's too late. At first, the issue seems small. A tiny compromise, a bad habit, a questionable decision. But over time, the consequences grow, and suddenly the thing you thought you controlled starts controlling you. This pattern appears constantly throughout the Bible. Warnings came first. Consequences came later. But here's where things get serious. When God keeps trying to get your attention and you continually ignore it, the lessons usually become louder. Not because God hates you, because He's trying to save you from something bigger. Sometimes today's frustration is actually preventing tomorrow's disaster. And this is where most people misunderstand God. They think warnings are rejection, but many times warnings are protection. Your discernment feels stronger than usual. Have you ever walked into a situation and instantly felt something wasn't right? No logical explanation, no visible proof, just a deep spiritual discomfort. Many believers describe this as discernment. And while emotions can sometimes mislead us, there are moments when God warns people internally before external proof ever appears. This is especially important in relationships, opportunities, and life-changing decisions. But here's where things get interesting. People often pray for signs from God while ignoring the discernment He already gave them. If your spirit keeps warning you repeatedly, slow down before moving forward blindly. Because wisdom whispers before consequences scream. And this is where many people regret their decisions later. They ignored what they felt because they wanted what they saw. You suddenly feel pulled to change direction. Sometimes God's warning doesn't come through fear. Sometimes it comes through a growing desire to leave something behind. Old habits no longer satisfy you. Old environments feel uncomfortable. Old goals suddenly feel empty. And deep down, you know you're being called somewhere different. But here's the challenge. Change feels uncomfortable even when it's necessary. Many people resist God's redirection because familiarity feels safer than obedience. But some of the greatest breakthroughs begin with recognizing that God is trying to move you before the situation collapses completely. Not every warning feels dramatic. Sometimes it feels like a quiet invitation to grow. And sometimes the greatest act of faith is walking away from something that no longer gives you peace. So remember this. God's warnings are rarely about fear. They're about protection, direction, and preparation. The signs only become dangerous when they're ignored repeatedly. And that story looped from the beginning? The reason so many people recognize the warning too late is because they keep waiting for God to shout while ignoring the whispers He already sent. If this video helped you understand the signs God is warning you about something, then you'll definitely want to watch the next video where we break down the hidden ways God tests your faith before a breakthrough. And if you made it this far, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which sign stood out to you the most.